Buongiorno tutti. Today I want to recreate this beautiful image by the maybe just slightly talented artist Kibooki. Just look at this beautiful thing and look at this guy's artwork. As I say, I think there might just be a little bit of talent there. Right, so first things first, let's bring the reference image in that we're going to be working from. And in keeping with the reference, I want to try and keep this model as simple as possible. It'll make it easier to work with and easier to rig and animate if we decide to go that way eventually. So I'm going to keep it quite boxy, and I'm going to let a subdivision surface do most of the heavy lifting for us. A wrist is pretty much cylindrical, so I'm going to add a cylinder. I'm thinking about how these fat little fingers spread out from the wrist, and I can use the number of sides of this cylinder as a kind of a guide, a kind of a helper here. Kibooki's image, as I say, is beautifully simple, and in classic cartoon style, you've just got those three fingers plus the thumb. So I'm just going to go with 9 sides on this cylinder. And whilst I'm here, in the last operations menu at the bottom left, I might as well set it up so it matches the reference pretty closely right from in here. So I can change the radius, I can change the height, I can even change the position. Dial things in a little bit here whilst I've got this menu open. Now, because I've only got 9 sides, I can now extrude some chunky fingers out from the base of this cylinder. I'm just going to draw a little note on here. What I mean is that I want to create a square at the bottom, or a series of squares around the bottom of this cylinder, and I'm just going to extrude those squares out. A subdivision surface, if you've got a if you've got a square shape, it's just going to automatically turn that square shape into a circle. You can see that on the symbol for the subdivision surface modifier. Right, let's get the bottom of this cylinder lined up with where the palm of the hand would be. And I can use this horizontal part of the thumb in the reference to help me gauge that. I'm using machine tools here. So when I tab into edit mode, it speeds up my selection mode. I can go directly into vertex, edge, or face, or you can use these options across the top here, or the shortcuts 1, 2, and 3 above your keyboard. Now, to be able to extrude out the fingers, I'm going to put a loop cut in here and bring it down towards the bottom of this cylinder. And I'm going to line it up about where we see the fingers sticking out of the wrist in the reference. Now I'm in face mode. I'll select what will become the base of the fingers. This one facing us, next 2, and then go around the corner. And I'm going to extrude out this face for it to become the thumb. And I'm going to use the shortcut Alt-E, and that's my extrude sort of master shortcut. It gives me these options here. I'm going to select extrude individual faces. That will make each one a separate extrusion, as it were. Now, when you're using a subdiv workflow, you're kind of creating a square, boxy cage that the subdivision is going to kind of smooth out on the inside, is going to cling to the inside of that box in a really smooth, rounded way. So you're always working a bit bigger with the cage, your original geometry, than you want the final smooth shape of the subdiv to be. Now, at this point, I don't really know precisely what the subdivision is going to look like. So there's no point in me worrying too much about accuracy just yet. One thing I am bearing in mind, though, is that I want the fingers to be more or less the same profile all the way along. I want them to be square in the original geometry all the way along, so that then they'll form a nice rounded cylindrical shape, circular in section all the way along. So I'm thinking about the proportions of those original faces that we extruded out. They were square. So I'll extrude out another square from the end of that. And that means that now if I swing underneath the model here, if I look underneath, I can extrude out the fingertips from these new polygons that have been formed. And I know because they're square as well, that they're going to be about the correct sort of profile. Tab back to object mode. And I'm going to throw a subdivision modifier on there. I can use a shortcut for that. Control 1 for just one level of subdivision. I'm going to go for Control 4. That gives me immediately 4 subdivisions. And that gives me a nice, smooth subdivision. And right now we have maybe something that's from the movie Arrival. Yeah, I think we need a bit more definition here at the top. Now that that's done, we can start tweaking the shape of the fingers in a similar way. We're going to move edges around, maybe add some more edges in. We can grab whole faces and push and pull them. In a minute, I'm going to speed up this footage because it gets fairly repetitive. And once I've been through a few steps, you'll very much get the idea. Before we get into that though, let's try and match the perspective of this reference image. Bring in a camera with the Shift A shortcut, type in CAM, camera, and now go to your preferences because you're going to need one of the viewport pie menus working here just to make it a little bit snappier to work with. So open your preferences with Control or Command, comma. We're looking for add-ons. I'm going to search in this box for PIE for pie, viewport pie. All right, close that down. Back in the viewport, Alt-Q, go into front view, and then again, back into the Alt-Q menu, and this time, cam to view. Now, the camera that we just brought in has jumped to try and mimic our perspective as best it can. But of course, we're in orthographic, and this is a perspective camera, so it looks a bit different. Then again, open that Alt-Q menu, and this time lock cam to view. And this is going to enable us to navigate as per usual using the middle mouse button. But the camera will be moving this time. So we're going to be looking through the camera as we navigate. And I can center the camera a bit better to the reference in this way. Now, I prefer for this sort of thing to use a longer lens. A longer lens gets me back towards more of an orthographic look, whereas a shorter lens will be much more fish-eyed. You get much more of a sort of distorted wide angle. So I'm going to go for 100 mil over here in the object properties, the data properties of this camera. I think that the artist Kibooki used a similar kind of camera length, a focal length to this. That will mess things up at first, so we're going to have to go back into using our control middle mouse or scroll the mouse wheel to get the zoom to more or less match the reference. But let's also match the aspect ratio. So we just need to come across to the output properties here. And you can see at the moment we're in this 16 by 9, 1080 by 1920 standard sort of HD camera. We're kind of rotated through 90 degrees. So let's try making it a narrower, taller aspect ratio. And as you can see, there's going to be a fair amount of fiddling around now, jumping back and forth between navigating to move the camera in our view and tweaking the camera aspect ratio over here in the object properties, the output properties, until things match. All right, that's a pretty good match. So now what I want to do is make sure I don't stuff things up. So number one, I'm going to stick the reference image to this camera. So wherever I move the camera, then the reference image is going to come along with it. So numpad 0 to hop out of camera view. And I'm also going to do one more thing. I'm going to go back into the Alt-Q menu and I'm going to unlock the camera from the view. Otherwise, if I'm looking through the camera and I navigate, I'm going to mess things up again. I'm going to navigate with the camera and that moves the camera. I don't want to do that. So unlock the camera from the view. Now I'm going to parent, as I said, the reference to this camera. So select the reference first, Then I'm going to use the Control P shortcut. That's the parenting shortcut. And I'm going to say set parent to object keep transform. Now, numpad 0, jump back into the camera. Double check, Alt Q. If you see a locked icon next to the lock camera to view, you need to unlock it so that you don't stuff up your camera view. And now as I orbit, the reference remains static. Doesn't matter where the camera goes, where it turns, it's looking directly at this reference. I'm going to escape out of that move so I don't stuff things up again. Right, and the last thing I want to do is set up a way to have finer control over this camera. Now, this is a classic trick of the trade. You have a control object outside of the camera, which the camera is locked to, and wherever this control object turns, the camera turns as well. So that means I can get really fine-grained control without having to sort of navigate from within the camera, which actually can be quite fiddly and doesn't give you anything like the same sort of rotational control. So it's the same process really, like I did with the reference and the camera. But I'm going to do that via an add-on. This speeds things up again. So once again, Control or Command comma, add-ons. This time I'm going to search for extra. And what I want is extra objects. Now back in the viewport, Shift A for the add menu. And this time type parent. And with that add-on that we just enabled, we now have this parent to empty option. Select that, and the camera is now parented to an empty, which has been given the name object. And under the last operations menu, we can set that empty's name. I'll just call it cam control. And whilst we're here, we can also set its position. I'm going to switch to the cursor, and you can see the empty jumps to the 3D cursor. That was in the center of the scene here where I'd left it. And now I can select that empty. And if I rotate it axis by axis, you can see I can get this lovely fine-grained control over the rotation. So for safety's sake, I'll now lock the camera. I'll make it unselectable in the viewport. I'm going to go up here into my outliner. Up at the top right, I've got my filters. I'm going to get the selectability filter going, and I'm going to click the icon next to the camera, and that means that now I can't select it in the viewport. I'll do the same for the reference image. Now, how to match this perspective? Well, I think the top of the wrist is a good spot to try and match. You can see that we're not looking dead on to the side of this wrist. We're a little bit over the top, so we can see a little bit of the flesh at the top of the wrist that the bone's sticking out of. And I think we'd be wise to turn up the opacity of this ref. So let's go into its object properties here, opacity, turn that back up to 100. And I'm just going to toggle it off and on, just because if I'm trying to see the reference and the object at the same time, it can get a little bit confusing. Okay, I reckon that's in about the right spot now. So we can adjust these fingers by, as I say, moving edges around, adding in loops, and so on. I'll just start off slowly, and then I'm going to speed the footage up because you will see it's a very repetitive process. This brings us to the end of part 1 of this little tutorial series. In part 2, I'm going to go into more detail with modeling techniques as I start tackling the facial features. For now, do zústrici. 3D from Zero makes tutorials and quick tips about 3D software. If you're into 3D, or you'd like to be, check out my free course on 3dfromzero.com, and there are some paid courses there too. Thanks for watching.